the adolescent crisis has not changed ever, which is I wake up one day and I realize that my parents don't know everything. And that is such a shock to the system.
Yeah.
But you don't know what they're wrong about. Like, I know my parents are wrong about some stuff, but I don't know what it is. And for me, it's always been, and that's part of, I think, being a pastor, is like creating space for them to have their own journey. Their faith, practice, and expression and beliefs are going to be different from their parents. And that's okay.
Hey, welcome to the Roots That Last podcast, where parents have the opportunity to share their expertise, their experiences, and their wisdom on creating a lasting faith in their families. This week, we had the opportunity to talk to Sean and Rochelle Palmer. Sean is on staff here. He's one of our teaching pastors, and Rochelle works at an all-girls school here in Houston, and she also teaches here at Ecclesia. And we got to talk about how to have practical conversations about Jesus with your kids. Ryan, what did you like most about this conversation?
Well, I'm a huge fan of the Palmers. I mean, they're just amazing. So I think getting to hear their wisdom and experience was like just a really like meaningful time. I loved hearing what they had to say. It was cool to hear like their own unique take and experience as a couple, you know, parenting together. And I absolutely loved that Rochelle took the time to talk to their girls about even the questions they asked and like get them to inform the answers and say like, well, what was your experience with this? So I think the people that watch, the parents that are out there are going to just be really excited to hear that. So why don't we check this episode out?
Yeah, let's do it. Well, Sean and Rochelle, thank you so much for coming on to our podcast. We're so excited to have you. I'm excited to jump into our conversation today. So our topic that we've asked you guys to share a little bit about is kind of the practical ways to have meaningful conversations with your children about faith. So I know your daughter, Kate, very well. I also know Malia, and both of them love Jesus a lot. And that's really awesome to see. And both of them care deeply about their faith in their own personal ways. You know, I can say that for sure about Kate. She thinks deeply about her faith and about what it looks like to follow Jesus and does not have any fear around talking about it at all. And I'm sure a lot of that comes from being able to talk about it at home very openly. So yeah, I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say. And I'm grateful for the ways that your parenting has made her who she is, because I love her and she's great. So, but first of all, I'd love it if you guys could just tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, Sean, you're on staff, and Rochelle, you teach. So probably the people of Ecclesia are familiar with you guys, but just tell us about yourself, how you got here.
As we were talking earlier when we were not recording, I'm a social worker by training. And then about 15 years ago, I transitioned into working in education. And I teach at an all-girls school. Here in Houston, obviously. These are all just facts. Like, I'm trying to think of something that will let you know, like,
Rochelle's
who we
also
are.
a preacher's daughter.
What are we? I'm a preacher's kid.
And a child of
Cool, I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, so that's probably a good thing. If you can't tell.
You're so normal.
So yeah, I'm so normal. I seem so okay. I'm trying to think, like, what are the things that make us us?
I mean, I guess you could, you know, tell me about your ministry side of things. Like, how did you... Like, what's that faith journey look like? Obviously, ministry professionally is kind of a big part of both of y'all's life.
Right. So we both grew up in homes in the same Christian that come from the same Christian tradition. And when we got to college, we went to a school that was connected to that group. And that part of our identity was the most important thing for us. And that's one of the reasons that I think we're drawn to each other, and why we chose to marry each other is because we were looking for a certain type of person who had a certain type of values, and who was going to engage in a certain type of practice over their lifetime, which would involve participation in a church community, leadership, engagement with people. We have a fundamental, like, core belief that our marriage and our family should make a difference to the communities that we're a part of. And that it should have some kind of influence and impact on our surroundings. It's not just for us, but it's for something bigger. And so those kind of beliefs have been what's kind of guided us as we've gone through just all the ups and downs of life, and losing parents, losing siblings, parenting our own girls. And I think a lot of our ministry career, so to speak, a lot of it, I feel like people know because so much of it is public, because Sean is a more public person. Like the thing he does in teaching is seen by people, on a weekly or biweekly basis. But our concern has always been for, I guess, like the spiritual nurture and care of people that we're around, and to meet people at places where they're hurting, and to hopefully help them reach places of healing, or at least to know that they're loved and not alone.
Yeah.
Like one of the things about our tradition, which is shared by you, Ryan, like I think that I wish we're more valued, like in the greater church, are things like secrecy, like doing things without need for recognition. Doing things that can't be recognized. We grew up in a very thick fellowship, and what I mean by that is like everybody knows each other, and if you meet someone, like if you talk for about 10 minutes, you can probably identify someone that, and couples like that. It's crazy that the same person who was a babysitter for your wife was also a babysitter for Rochelle when she was and like,
but we're also like, of course that happened.
But like what it did for us is like church has always been family. And so one of the things for our relationship that's always been central is that our community of faith is always going to be central to who we are as a family and who we are as a couple. There are certain things that you do when you're just always involved in your community of faith. And like, they don't have to necessarily be the most exciting thing for you at that moment, but like, oh, that's what our church is doing. So that's what we're going to do. And so our girls have grown up, not because I was on staff at churches, but like, this is what we would have done anyway. And so we brought that kind of shared understanding. When Rochelle and I teach our premarital class at Ecclesia, like one of the things we talk about frequently is like when we got married, we made promises to each other, but we made a promise to God about the way that our relationship would be. And so when things get difficult, when family gets hard, when you just rather not, when it's not exciting or fun, like you are faithful to your commitments. And I find that kind of orientation has not just helped us endure hard times, but reduce hard times.
I'd love to hear, this is more from a perspective of like your home life, your day-to-day life with your girls. How have you initiated conversations about Jesus, conversations about faith, just in the everyday moments?
When you guys sent us the questions, I actually talked to the girls about them because I actually wanted to know, like, what did we do that,
I love that.
that really, that made this accessible for you? And what, so I have some things they shared. I mean,
You did your homework.
Yeah, so prepared.
Yeah. So,
Sean, do you have your notes or?
He's undoubtedly going to copy it. Look at my notes.
This is how I got
just
through
like
the
college.
Gospel of Luke.
Just like in college. That's true. All right. A couple of kind of guiding principles or overall things is one, is that we started this early. Like we did not suddenly watch our girls hit middle school and say, oh man, we've got to start, talking about faith or getting involved. This has been just the natural overflow of who we are. And we started it very young. So even when I asked the girls about this, Malia said, well, I remember being really little and you and Dad would like read a Bible story, and we had a little sketchbook, and we would just draw a picture of something we remembered from the story.
That's great.
So even when this is like probably preschool and early, maybe like pre-K kindergarten, even when we weren't having like deep conversations, but we were interacting, and then, tell me about your picture. What part of the story did you draw? So we've always done things like that just as a family. She also remembers that sometimes we remember this differently. She remembers would read a story at night for bed, and then they would act it out. I remember that as being them trying to get up out of bed. Avoid going to bed under the guise of we're doing Bible things, But she remembers that, like we did. I remember this too. We talked about this, that the story of Elijah in the cave. She remembers like getting out of bed and going to her door, looking around, looking up and down the hallway, because Elijah's hearing the earthquake or those things. So those types of things have really made an impression on them that they've carried with them. And then, so I think just starting it early and letting that be just a part of the fabric of our home allowed for scripture and stories and experience to just be discussed. Another kind of simple one that Catherine mentioned was that we've always had dinner together every night. And she said that's been huge. She said that's been huge for her because we all sit around the table together and we just talk. And she said, just that we always knew we could talk about anything, and that we knew we had that time every day to have access to each other.
If that's the routine and that's the habit, then those conversations are just going to come up naturally. Yeah,
and so like just a word about that, because it's so fascinating to me, because I remember when they were young, we were living in Temple, and I was coaching Malia's soccer team, and we had practice the same night that they had their ballet classes, their dance classes, and stopping at like the Golden Chick between the two to buy dinner one night. And I thought, we're not doing this. Like, we're not going to be that family. That is just like going from
eating in the car,
eating in the car, going from event to event. Because I was the coach, I was able to change like when practice was. But there has always been something like we have always made a point to deliberately be together, partly to create moments for conversation so that they would be natural. So, and Ryan, you and I have talked about this because people always come to our house and wonder why there's no television. In the living room. There's walk around the whole first floor. There's no TV in here. And it's like, because we will sit in the living room and we will talk. And like, it is a way to not necessarily force conversation, but to have conversations without distraction. And because I was a pastor, the last thing we wanted, and there was a lot of pressure when we were young parents, like sit down with your family and have a family devotional every night. And I remember with my parents, like we're going to read through the Bible in a year. And it was just dreadful. And I never wanted for the girls to feel like they had to do this because Dad was a pastor. And so we decided we want to be open to conversation and very deliberate. And when you're in a pastor's family, you overhear a lot about life. But we wanted everything to be natural, to facilitate conversation. And like, these are the things that we would naturally do. And one of the things like also that the girls mentioned is like, they saw us actually doing it. Like, there's like, like Mom is in her journaling Bible. Like Dad is doing this. Like so it was a natural overflow of what we were doing.
It wasn't just some unusual occurrence.
It's like, well, now it's the time where we and we wanted that to be the case for us because we were a ministry family and we didn't want the girls to feel extra pressure because of Dad's job and all of that. So we just looked for ways to incorporate it into, and all spiritual formation is this, right? Like, you can't make yourself more spiritual, but you can create the conditions for God to speak And I think what we tried to do, to whatever extent we were successful, I don't know, was just create an environment where conversation about spiritual life felt natural.
Yeah, it wasn't like, okay, this moment we're going to have this big conversation, and it just feels like, wait, where is this coming from?
Right.
Yeah, just flowed more naturally.
Were there ever times where you felt like either one of them was resistant or uninterested in conversations about faith, or that there was like, a resistance or an uncomfortability? And how did you navigate that?
You mean like when Malia said she was probably agnostic?
Hey,
Could be an example.
So maybe that.
Was it 6th grade, 7th grade?
6th, 7th grade, maybe
yeah.
Yeah.
maybe the early
Tell
in
us about
8th.
that.
I think it started to change, but
Yeah.
so Malia really went through this time, 6th, 7th grade, where she was very much like, church is y'all's thing, and it's not my thing, and I'm not interested, and I don't actually think there's a God out there who cares about us. And I get it. It's an expectation that I go to church, but I'm just going. It's very, and she's very clear about that. And even in a youth group context one time, made kind of a comment along those lines, which was uncomfortable for a minute, as all the other youth volunteers stared at me, and I was like, yeah, that's where we are right now.
Yeah.
The pastor's daughter doesn't know what she thinks.
Sure.
Here we are. But I think that, okay, so I don't want to minimize that. That, for as parents, really jarred us and scared us. And so I'd want anyone who's listening to this to know that, like, we're not immune to that, and we're not brushing over it.
Right.
We just happen to be on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And that really did lead to
the extent where we're like, why do we even have children?
Yeah, I mean, like, we're like, what were we thinking? Like, obviously, we're ill-equipped to do this.
yeah.
And like, I can remember
We don't know what
nights.
we're doing. We
Yeah.
do it.
And it was embarrassing. And how are we going to tell our parents? And just all these things. And then the nights where we would just lay in bed, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I would be sometimes crying, or we would just lay there and like holding hands and praying, because what do we do? Like nothing's more important than their faith development. And how, like, if we're going to fail, we can fail in any other area, really, but like not this. So it was really, really challenging and really hard as parents to navigate that. And one of those things where you have to work, to not blame yourself and to not blame your spouse, if you hadn't ever said that, where you're like,
Right.
That's the minute it all fell apart. Those types of things. So it took like a lot of prayer on our part, and then a lot of us talking about, like, what is our posture going to be? What do we think is the best thing to do here? And through that, our approach was, like, we have always said, like, the girls get to make their own decisions, and we are not forcing this on them. We're not going to try and talk her into something, because if you're talked into something, you can be talked out of it. And and then in some of the studies and mom's classes I'd been in, one of the kind of things we said to each other a lot was, like, God loves your child more than you do.
Yeah.
And that's so hard to even imagine, but it's true. And so I would just cling to that, like, God loves her more than we do. And so the best thing we can do is just guide her through whatever she's going to go through with this, which is what we did, right? And so we told her that yes, the expectation in our house is that you will go to church with us, but we are not going to dictate what you believe or what you practice. And we just ask that that you will talk to us about it, which, because we had talked about these things up until that point in her life, was a very natural thing to do. I don't think it ever even occurred to her that she would not talk to us about those things, which I think was probably super helpful. Because we all did, but she and Sean, especially during that time, had a lot of really important conversations. And you can say more about kind of your approach, but
Yeah, I mean, like, it was very jarring. But I think it's probably actually a conversation that most parents need to be prepared for.
Yeah.
And my initial conversation to her was really simple. It was like, okay, if you're agnostic, if you're atheist, that's your decision to make. So, I mean, the important thing, I think we did well. We didn't freak out,
Right.
at least not in front of her.
right.
And I said, but like, don't be a Twitter atheist. I told her, I said, don't be a Twitter atheist. I said, like, chase it all the way down to the bottom. So when we have conversations, I want you to have the best arguments for atheism. Like, to have the best arguments for, and like, we can always talk about this. So just don't be like, like the freshman philosophy class at a university. It's like, oh, I'm just hearing this for the first time.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to renounce everything that I've ever learned or experienced or believed. I said, just do that. Because I knew that if she did that, my hunch was that she would come out at a different place. Because everyone goes through adolescence. And, my undergraduate studies were in adolescent development, right? And so the adolescent crisis has not changed ever, which is I wake up one day and I realize that my parents don't know everything. And that is such a shock to the system.
Yeah.
But you don't know what they're wrong about. Like, I know my parents are wrong about some stuff, but I don't know what it is. And so, like, now let me just test everything.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know how much of it was that, how much of it was like a genuine like disconnection from faith and God. And so I think we just decided, like, this is our child. She's going to be our child forever. So this is just the beginning of a journey with her, and that we're going to let her have that journey the same way that we were allowed to come to our commitments and beliefs.
I think there's a lot of children that grow up in Christian households that would never say that, even if they felt that way.
Yeah, it's like too
that would,
scary.
Yeah, that would not. I mean,
not
I
a safe place for.
I would not. I went through a similar phase where I probably would have considered myself agnostic or atheist, and I would have never told my mom because I mean, I knew she would have been heartbroken and devastated to hear that, but also because I think we weren't having those regular conversations about faith, so it wasn't. I mean, that would have felt like way more of a bomb drop for me to be like, I know we don't really talk about this. Also, I don't think I believe it. Like, we just go to church, you know?
Yeah.
So I think in the talking about it, even when the conversations were not what you would hope the conversations to be, the fact that you could say, don't be a Twitter atheist, the fact that you could say, like, you have the autonomy to believe what you want to believe, that's an advantage that I think comes from you guys having those conversations that other parents or other kids might not feel like they could bring that to you. So I think that's cool.
I'd like to hear more as you're having these conversations with your girls and as they're going through their own spiritual discovery, deciding what they believe, like all these things. Have there been things where you felt like it just really helped make those conversations about Jesus, conversations about faith more meaningful, more engaging? Or I guess the flip side of it was like, this always sort of shut it down and it just didn't work really well. Like what helped the conversations be more meaningful?
I can tell you a couple things they said.
I love that.
One was kind of, and this goes along with what Madeline was just saying about one of the girls had said that they just weren't afraid to ask questions because we always answered or responded. And so, like Catherine said, you always answered my little questions. So when I had big questions, she goes, I felt like I could trust you with them. Like I knew you were going to take the big questions because you even took kind of the more trivial ones. And in her mind, that was significant. And then she also, Malia had said that one of the things that made it kind of easier or that further the discussions was that when they would come to us and ask us about what something meant or what are we supposed to believe about X, that our approach would be, well, like some people think that the Bible says this, and some people think that the Bible teaches this. What do you think? And we would always kind of like throw it back to them. Like, we're not telling you what to believe.
Yeah.
We're going to tell you how some different interpretations are, or how there's some different understandings. And we want you to do your thinking. And then they would often come back to us with an answer. I mean, but like when Malia was five, we were sitting having like after school snack at the kitchen table one day, and she says to me, "Mom, was there really a flood?"
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like she's always had this kind of approach to, like, that doesn't quite sit right with me.
Right.
So and instead of, there's this gut reaction in me that's like, how do you explain to a 5-year-old the Genesis 1-11 being true but not fact, or or so
The ahistorical.
yeah, exactly. So
Those texts.
but those types of questions always came up, and that day I told her, I said, well, some people think that there really was a flood and this happened. I said, there's also this idea that, every culture that was around in that era has some kind of story of a flood. So that could mean that there was one, or it could be that this was just the imagery of the time. And, every culture kind of had this tale, this common tale.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you think? And I remember her looking at me and she goes, probably not. And I said, okay,
a little bit.
So I think, but in that is both two things I think are important. One, that our girls have always been allowed to come to their own conclusions in their own timing. And we have not judged them, right? And it's okay if they just, like, if Malia at 5 was like, yeah, probably not, Mom. Okay, I'm not going to argue that with you. Like, you get to think that if she had,
there's space for that.
There's space, there's space
Well,
for
and
that.
the thing is, like, people are going to come to their own conclusions anyway.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
In the fullness of time. So, I mean, one of the things that Rochelle did really well, because the girls always went to her with questions first. It was like we split time at home when Malia was a baby. So Rochelle was at home 2.5 days and I was home 2.5 days. But like as time got extended, like I went back to work full time and she was just there with them. And so they always went to her first, and she didn't freak out about the questions.
Sure. Yeah.
And many times, just from my working in student ministry days, what shut down a lot of conversation was like parents who just freaked out about the question itself.
And feel like they had to give the pat answer.
Yeah, it's almost like if you, while you're having this conversation, if you can just kind of be in some control of your own emotional reaction, and then freak out later when the kids are when the kids are, because it really does. I think what she did that was really helpful for the girls was that created a secure place to like I can't, like, life's big questions don't rattle Mom, so they don't have to rattle me either.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about this from my perspective too, because I mean, I know Malia now as a junior in college. Is that right? Yeah, and so and then as you know, my oldest son is in 6th grade, and not too long ago he asked right at bedtime, of course, like we're literally like about to fall asleep, just dropping like big, heavy, raw questions, stuff that like I'm grateful he asked, but it was almost like I didn't even know that was in there. But it's just comforting even for me to hear you like reflect on this journey and think of like, where Malia is now, and then knowing like my own son's like in that same kind of phase. And that I hope for people listening, it's just, they're probably in my shoes going like, oh, okay. So it's like, this is all pretty normal stuff. Yeah.
And remember this too, Ryan, like you can get a kid to do almost anything if you ask them at bedtime.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I had something else to add that Catherine and I discussed, is that, because I think it also goes back to your original question, or which I realize we've kind of lost, but I think it's connected.
Bring us
it's in
back.
here somewhere.
Bring us back, Rochelle.
Is that one of the things that both girls said was that they had seen from us that it was okay to struggle. And that it was okay to be in situations where you didn't necessarily know, like, what is the right thing to do here, or what is the right thing to believe, or, Catherine mentioned, she said, Mom, I was 10 when you did this program I did this program when she was 10, so 8 years ago, right? That was this really intensive study on a specific issue in text. And it was really intensive. It was like 15 weeks, and it was like taking a graduate level course. And I was reading all the time, and I was having conversations all the time because I was getting new information. It was really challenging some of my, the assumptions I've had coming to the text. And she said, like, I was 10 when you did that. And I remember you and Dad talking about it and having, like, you not knowing for sure, what you thought, and you thinking that maybe you'd been looking at this scripture the wrong way, and that kind of growth. And so knowing,
you're growing,
I'm growing. And so knowing that, that we had struggles, or that we would come back to text and see things differently, and that we would have discussions about, I'm not sure what the Christian thing to do is. This is something else in our household that I think we do that I'm not in everyone's household, so I don't know if they do it. But like when we are making decisions, and when we have, even when we talk about current events, we talk about, like, okay, what is the Jesus response to the situation? Like, not just, okay, tell us how you feel. What do you wish you could do? How do you feel about it? And then, but the last thing we always say is, okay, and because we are believers, what is the appropriate or best response for us to make?
I remember a couple of years ago when something was happening in the world, and Kate was just like, Dad, like, I just don't think that's what Jesus would do. Which was like a kind of out of the blue response. Like, we were just talking about like a contemporary issue, or when Malia says they didn't do the reading, like, we know what that means, like that shorthand in our butts, like, So
in the seasons where you've seen them start to take an interest in their faith, what's been the response to that? Because I'd say, for me, when I came to faith, there was a part of me that wanted to talk with my parents about it, but there was also a part of me that really found this independence with wanting it to be able to be my own thing, and wanting it to be able to be something that I could independently navigate, and even sometimes navigate with other adults, or like youth leaders at my church. So I guess but also, like, I do really appreciate my parents using me coming to faith in a new way as a point of connection. And like, I've had really great conversations with my dad that I never would have imagined having about faith, and getting to know the side of my dad that he has a really deep faith that we never really got to talk about.
So I would say that like a guiding principle for me as a mom is to remember that what my ultimate goal is. Because I think, and I don't know, but it may just be this way for all parents, but there is this drive, I know, in a lot of moms, and I've had it before too, that like, if the girls are having a significant experience, I want to be in the center with them, right? Like, I want to experience that with them, and I want to be as much a part of that as I can be. And so one of the ongoing works of a parent is to remember what your ultimate goal is. And my ultimate goal is not for them to have me with them every minute of every day for the rest of their lives, right? Even though I want to experience all these things with them, like, my ultimate goal is for them, in a spiritual sense, is for them to have an active faith and relationship with Jesus that they pursue on a daily basis through practices that leads to spiritual transformation. And that they are on a journey that continually moves them toward being Christ-like. That this is what I want for them. And the reality is that at some point, and this is a big adjustment for me as a parent, when they are little, you almost feel like you are the intercessor, right? And so you have this role of like, I'm kind of between you and God, right? As I'm teaching you, and as I'm modeling for you, and as I'm showing you things. And then there is this point where you realize, oh, like, I'm actually not in that anymore. Like, we can share it this way, but it's no longer vertical in the sense that you have your own relationship with God. And that means that I want to be a part of that as much as you will allow me to be, but that it really has to be theirs.
Yeah.
And here's how I experienced that. Because I have been a Bible journaler for a long time, even before TikTok. Before everyone was showing. I mean, that was just a good way for me to study independently. And so I have always done that. And I used to love it when the girls were little and they would hop up next to me on the kitchen table and say, hey, Mom, what are you reading? And we'd talk about it. Oh, I'm reading this story where this happened. Oh, I remember that story. We had little conversations.
Okay.
So then when the girls got to be kind of late middle school, they both wanted a journaling Bible. And I was like, this is fantastic because now we're all going to sit at the kitchen table, have all the colored pencils out. Like, we're all just going to be journaling away and talking about what we're doing. And we're going to have these great conversations. It's going to be fantastic. And lo and behold, like they literally said to me, no, we want to journal on our own. Like this is our time. And I was like, what? No, it's our time.
Yeah.
And they
really
were like,
built this up.
Yeah,
in
it
your
really
head.
built this up in my head. It's like my dream moment, right? It's like I'm a good Christian mom because we're all journaling in our Bibles at the same time. But really, like they did not need me for that. Like I had done what I needed to do. I had shown them a way that they could study the scripture independently and that they could find meaning in it independently. And they were doing that. And that's better than us sitting around and doing it together.
Yeah.
Because that they take with them.
Yeah.
Right? Like when I'm not there anymore, whether it's because of college or whether it's because my time here ends, like that's a practice they will still have.
Yeah.
And that they can then pass on to their children. Right? And so just being open to kind of getting out of the way really and allowing God to do what he's going to do with them and with their practices and their habits.
Yeah.
And knowing that you don't have to, you're not supposed to be a part of all of that.
Yeah.
Mine was probably a little bit different, especially as like in their adolescence and teen years. Because as I've mentioned before to parents that if you have teenagers, whatever you choose to do, you pick the wrong thing. Right. So, and every parent knows what it is to have your kid choose to do the thing that you would choose for them to do and be so super excited about it, but know that you can't show them that you're too excited about it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm really, so you're just like, do your little happy dance in your mind. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh yeah. And try to like stay cool. Like, because if I'm too excited,
Play it cool.
exactly. If I'm too excited, that will ruin the whole thing. And so it was not like hands off, but when the girl, like they were doing like their journaling and my task, I felt like, especially as they got older, was just to make space for it. And like I said, the girls always go to Rochelle first with questions. Malia's doing a bunch of stuff with her Christian sorority at UT and in her church. Kate does stuff here, and they never come to me with any of it. And like, even when they were like, Rochelle will say, oh, they're teaching this, Malia's small group. And I will say, oh, I've got a great, like we can talk about it. They don't want to talk to me.
Yeah. Rude.
And which is fine, because eventually they kind of like always like circle back, like once they've had their, so like for me, it's always been, and that's part of, I think, being a pastor is like creating space for them to have their own journey in all of that. And like honoring it, like, what do you need? And so like, I mean, there are songs in the Ecclesia hymnody now that are there because Kate and Malia brought them to me. And so like, well, what about this? Like when they wanted to go to Passion, like that's not my kind of thing, but like they were like really excited about it. And I don't know that if of the buffet of Christian options in the world, that's what I would choose for them.
Yeah.
But they were excited about it, and we just sort of just nurtured it. So as your kids get older, when you move into like the coaching phase of child rearing, where it's like, I can't make you do anything. Like when they're little, you can make a kid do something. Then you move into that phase where you can make them wish they had done what you wanted them to do. And then you really move into like, I really can't make you because of my own personal convictions. And I don't want to send out this damage. I want you to go into the world as least damaged by me as possible. And so like to say, like, what does this child need to nurture and mature their faith? Because Malia and Kate have really different spirituality styles, like very different. And we're on vacation a couple years ago, and like the rest of the family's like ready to get up and go and do the thing that we're doing that day. And Malia's like, I'm gonna go sit on the balcony and drink coffee and pray the morning office. I'm like, girl, we trying to get out of here. Like, I need to pay for all this so we can use it. But you know what? Okay. That's what she's going to do. Yeah. I remember the times where like we're just like in the living room, like sharing music that's been meaningful to all of us, and why we like certain things over others, or like I saw this from TikTok to Instagram, or this person talking about this, and so it made me think. And we're just kind of trying to be like a big tent, knowing that because of our own journeys, like their faith, practice, and expression and beliefs are going to be different from their parents. And that's okay. Malia and Kate are not unorthodox. I wouldn't say, but the striations of their faith in many ways are different from my own. And there are some things that they've actually shifted me on. Like, you get to a place where there are a number of topics where your kids actually know more about that than you do. And to be able to pay attention to what they're teaching you. And to say, okay, like, I don't understand this. Explain it to me. And allow them to.
Yeah.
And like, I've grown from that. And I think that has helped, like, in their own faith development and my faith development. Like we are now 4 people who are having an experience with God that we can share with one another. And it's different for each of us. Like, I will never crack open a journaling Bible. Like, I'll just never, I will never do that. Praying in front of a bank of candles has never done anything for me. It's very meaningful for Malia. Last year, Kate went to visit Malia one weekend in Austin, and they went to a church that Kate wanted to go to. And it's big and loud and like fog machine.
Pyrotechnics.
And it's the kind of thing that's like right up her alley. And like Malia went because that's where Kate wanted to go.
Kate's just love
it. We're getting text all through the church service. Because Malia is like talking about the sermon that this guy's giving and everything that she thinks is not quite right with it. And Kate comes back and she says, like, that was so great.
Just love it.
That was happening at Passion too. I think I asked Malia at one point, I was like, so like, are you like, what do you think? Like, are you excited? Like, what is your take? And she goes, Kate asked me to go. This isn't normally what I would do.
Not my jam, but I'm here. It's interesting already. Just I'm noticing a thread where it's like, okay, shockingly, we're all individuals. So like you two have pointed out that like your own approach to spirituality and spiritual practices and even conversations about faith, like, is different. You're pointing out like Kate and Malia, have their individualities. And that was something when we spoke with Steve Turley and Alejandro. I mean, they even said like, well, our brother, like, his questions and his conversations and or the way mom would answer it, or like the type of things that seem more important or matter. So like, it's like, I think that's just maybe a good thing for parents to think about, is like, every kid's going to be different. Your own spouse is going to be different. We're in it together as a family, but there's not like a tried and true, like, this is the one way, this is the one method. Any other like just spiritual practices that have been helpful, meaningful to either you as parents or just to the girls, or that have just helped shape and guide the conversations you've had?
Well, I have two
Okay.
that I haven't addressed. Oh, and one is something from our lives that the girls had talked about, and one is something I observed this morning that I think is a very practical approach. So the first one is that one of the things that both girls said that had been significant for them is that they had overheard us have spiritual conversations with our friends. And so I think sometimes I don't think we do this at Ecclesia necessarily, but there are times where, we come to church or we come to small groups and we're trying to get the kids out of the room, or we're trying to, get the kids taken care of in some other context.
Yeah.
And it turns out that one of the things that was really significant for both of our girls was being able to overhear us talk about issues, texts, different Christian ideas, practices with our friends. And both of them said that they learned a lot. That they would hear things that they wanted to follow up on, or hear things that kind of shifted their thinking. And then it also has made it so that they are comfortable having those conversations with people. That seems normative to them. And the girls will often say, like, did you know that other families don't talk about this stuff like we do? Like what's and it's very much a like, we're not the weird ones, they're the weird ones. Like, why aren't people talking about this?
We
don't
talk about that.
Yeah, like they don't even talk about that. So I think modeling that, and then just knowing, just that reminder that your kids are always watching and listening to you. And so the conversations you're having, like if you spend all your time talking about the stock market, they're going to grow up thinking that that's what you should be talking about. Right. That this is what makes adult conversation. So, and you can talk about the stock market. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I'm just saying like if you remember to have the kinds of relationships where you are talking about your faith, with people and going through discernment processes in groups and working out your salvation with the people around you. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And the other thing is actually something I observed this morning that we did, but that I'd forgotten about until I saw it this morning. And this morning, we got to Westside early, and I saw Danny, our student minister, just in case someone's listening and they don't go to church here. Our student minister was here with his son, Ezra. And I think Ezra is 3, like about to be 4 in the spring, I think. Yeah. And Danny was going around and lighting all the candles in the venue. And Ezra was helping him. Right. And I just watched them for a minute, and like they would, of course, he can't touch the candle or touch the lighter, but they would get to a candle, and I overheard Ezra say like, "This one, Daddy," and so then Danny would like light the candle. That's and sweet. I thought something that I don't know that all families do is like including your kids in your service. Like whether it's to the church or whether it's to the community, like don't do that apart from them. Like take them with you when you can. Because as I watched it happen, of course it's super cute because Ezra's a cute kid.
Adorable.
And he's like reaching up and pointing to the candles, but not fully touching them. Getting his finger as close as he can without touching it, kind of a thing. And I thought this is one of those moments where like over time, if his, big boy job is to get up early and come to church with Dad and light the candles, like that's going to turn into a question. Dad, like, why do we do this?
Yeah.
Why are we here early? Why are we lighting the candles? Like, what's the purpose of this? Yeah. And then that turns into Danny being able to talk about his own experience. Why do we light candles? Yes, part of it's for like kind of mood and ambiance, and we're setting, a kind of a quiet or reverent tone, and also we're going to talk about, what does Jesus call himself? Like the light of the world. And it's all these opportunities to have these conversations. And that because eventually Ezra's going to want to know, why are we here and the other kids aren't,
Yeah.
So just including your kids in those types of opportunities, I think is really important for their development.
Yeah. So I want to mention too that don't sound very spiritual and that people understandably bristle at, but statistics would prove to be true about faith transmission to children And statistically speaking, the two dominant factors in passing on your faith to the next generation, this has been true for hundreds of years. Reading and time with dad. And there are a lot of cultural reasons that that's the case. And I don't want to litigate all of that, but kids who have lots of access to books and reading, because that's where you explore ideas. And when our girls were little, Rochelle, especially when we were in Northern California, like always at the library, always like, we're going to walk to the library, we're going to get books, we're going to this is why your house should have more books than you can read. So reading has always been a huge factor in faith formation, because you get access to long form arguments and ideas, and then time with dad. I think that's more historical, cultural than, I don't think it's like embedded in humanity, but it's just the way things are. And so from the time that the girls were little, I would come home from work and it was mandatory for me, like 30, 45 minutes, an hour of just floor time. Like to spend when I was, when the girls were little and I would go speak at retreats and whatever. I was speaking at a lot of youth retreats. Every time I was like, I'm bringing one of the girls with me. Until their schedules couldn't handle it. And because it just creates like the biggest flaw in child rearing over the last 40 years has been the lie about quality time. And it's not that quality time isn't important, but quality time is the outgrowth of quantity time.
Sure.
You can't have quality without quantity. And I know that quantity is not equal for everyone because we have all different stories, and some of us are in situations that we would not have chosen, or we don't get to see our kids as often as we would like to. But to maximize that time, because it's almost impossible to tell a young parent whose child just takes up every minute of their day and every ounce of their energy. It's almost impossible to say, like, this is really short. Like, this time is really short. And I get why they don't believe it, because I don't think that I believed it.
Sure.
But like with
they're more in the moment.
But like with, in 8 months, it'll just be Rochelle and I at home. And that has flown by like that. And the idea, like, we have known each other longer than we stayed at home with. We've lived with each other longer than either one of us lived with our parents. Right. And like that time seems super short.
But when you were living home with your parents, it seemed really,
super long. Right?
The longest phase of your life.
And I get why that's hard to believe, because I didn't believe it either, but it's so short that like these moments with your kids, especially for men, quite honestly, because you're in that career building and you're just like, you got to put food on the table and you got to save for college and save for retirement, and people need shoes and braces, and like there's so many pressures that that it seems like those, like dinner doesn't matter, or just hanging out doesn't matter. Going for a walk with a family, like why would I do this when I can? And like it super does. Like those, because it's in that benign walk of what that when you're walking the dog, that the real stuff of life actually happens. The real conversations actually happen. It's when everyone can slow down their brain and say, hey, Mom, Dad, I've been thinking about this. And you just can't do that running from baseball to soccer to dance to 4-H club to and like I just think it's super important. Like on my Substack, I've done a series on parenting, and my last entry was just like, most families are just too busy. You're just too busy. And that's why those conversations aren't happening, because you're not bored.
Yeah, you haven't allowed room for them to happen.
Yeah.
You said something when you talked about just bringing at least one of the kids with you too. Like I had a moment this summer where it wasn't like some big intentional thing we planned, but I ended up doing a summer trip with one of my kids. And man, like the difference between traveling 5 of us in an airport and it's like somebody's always in a bad mood or you're figuring out this thing and it's just like, you know, just you're constantly just trying to get to the next thing and just survive. And it was just like this unhurried 10-day like one-on-one time. And I was like, man, like we have to figure out how to do this more because it was invaluable. Like it was amazing. So I really love that you said that. Like I'll bring at least one of them along. Yeah.
Thank you guys for sharing your kids with us. And I tell Kate all the time that she impresses me so much. And she's also just insanely funny. When we were at Passion, I was like, Kate, your sense of humor is underrated. Like she makes me crack up, like laugh, belly laugh. She's great. But thank you guys so much for sharing and for being open and raising great kids and then sharing them with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for the conversation. Big thank you to the Palmers for being on the podcast in our first episode. Can I just say that I loved when we did the game that it was a couples quiz, but the fact that they and I remembered the old Newlywed Game and did like the kiss when they got the answer right, and that you had no idea what that even was.
Never heard of it. Never.
But it was just a great conversation with them.
Yeah, it was really great. We're excited because we have more episodes coming. As a reminder, we release our episodes on the first Wednesday of every month, so be looking out for that. Your reminder that you can subscribe and follow us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Music, wherever you listen or watch your podcasts, we are there. Thank you so much for watching our episode. Again, thank you to Sean and Rochelle for sharing, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.